sure your cinch is tight. Horse is kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burnin' Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Brought to you by Stetson Ranches out of Fromberg, Montana. Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. We got some rain falling on us. It's been raining pretty good here for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 hours. Pretty good amount of rain. Kind of nice. Been a while since we had any good measurable moisture, so just puts a fella in a good mood. I was doing well. I've been kind of in a block here lately. Like there's been busy as shit, so I've had a hard time scheduling interviews, and we're getting ready to be gone out of town, and just been busy. So scheduling wise has not been not been real ideal, and then we've just been busy. So my research time is limited, I suppose, and so I have a hard time coming up with something to talk about outside of just ranting about politics, but I figure you guys hear enough of that shit on a daily basis that you don't need me talking about it every episode. So anyway, that being said, I was trying to find some sort of inspiration and thoughts of where to go. I've been looking back through some of the old episodes, and there was one I thought I'd done an episode on. I know I've mentioned it, but it was a book called The Day the Cowboys Quit by Elmer Kelton. And I look back, and I don't think I've done an episode on it. And I'm not going to today either. I titled it because while we're going to talk about it quite a little bit, there's just a whole lot more to that story than I realized when I first. I think I listened to it on audiobook, but when I first read it or listened to it, whenever it was, I thought, boy, that's pretty neat. And you know, Elmer Kelton writes kind of historical fiction, so a lot of his stories are based on true stories. So I figured there was something to it, and I just didn't really dig too much deeper. And then just by chance, I was looking up different range wars throughout the old West, because that always, the old West was famous for it, and they're particularly interesting to me just because it's always a quandary between it's always the big guy versus the little guy, the working guy versus the big corporate or the government versus like the military versus the Indian. There's always that struggle there, and the range wars in particular is always kind of fascinated me, because it's like they're just set up for good stories, because it's like you're just classic evil rich guy is what they always at least get turned into, and sometimes there's a little more nuance to it, but the more you dig into it, it's just a case of it's there is some of that to it, but there's also there's just like the overbearing like corporate bureaucracy that plays into it, and so I with all that being said, I guess there's just there's a ton of nuance, and it's not always quite as it seems, and sometimes that story is even more as to what actually happened is more interesting than the story that you initially heard, and I don't know if that's quite the case because it's a pretty dang good book that Elmer Kelton is a pretty damn good writer. So that book, The Day the Cowboys Quit, is a hell of a story. But when you look to the backstory, um, there's there's a lot there. So um, find the big event that I kind of stumbled upon during this range war is called the Big Fight at the Dunn and Jenkins Saloon. I'm gonna read. This is and is homebrewedmojo.blogspot.com, and so this was March 21st, 1886. Nothing but a ghost town now, but once a place that rivaled the wild locales of the American West like Deadwood, Dodge City, Abilene, Bodie, and Tombstone. Tascosa, 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 Texas, has no town council, mayor, sheriff, or marshal for its first 5 years of existence. Is a tent, adobe, and wood village on the Texas Panhandle with a permanent population of never more than 300 souls that draws cattle rustlers, gamblers, dance hall girls, prostitutes, fugitives, thieves, gunslingers, and con men to the area, the bad part of Tascosa known as Hogtown, proves on an especially bloody Saturday, Sunday night of why Texas Ranger George Washington Cap Arrington will call the seat of newly established Oldham County the hardest place on the frontier. It will serve Hollywood as the town where James Stewart's Lynn McAdam will begin his final confrontation with his murderous brother Steve McNally's Dutch Henry Brown in Anthony Mann's 1950 Western Winchester 73, with a shootout that will be called the Big Fight at the Dunn and Jenkins Saloon. Once Texas Rangers authorized by the state government to get rid of the Canadian River Valley of cattle rustling led by the killer of Billy the Kid, Pat Garrett, by 1886, the Cowboys of the local LS Ranch are considered by Tascosa locals as another batch of barroom gladiators. All right, so I'm reading from this article. A little backstory is Pat Garrett, right after killing Billy the Kid, he gets tasked to go to the Texas Panhandle and settle this cattle wrestling feud, which a lot of it has there's a lot of circumstance that behind it, but basically it was a direct result of what they called syndicate ranching, and basically it was all these big ranches were, a lot of them anyways, were owned by English and Scottish corporations, and they had basically rigged the system to where they would pay the Cowboys so much. They had their set terms, and they had a really strict set of rules that governed their ranches, including no alcohol, no gambling, and most importantly, no branding of mavericks. You couldn't run your own cattle, and you couldn't brand mavericks. And there was kind of a little uprising, and that led to a bunch of rustling, and not just a small bunch of rustling, like, but they said something like 500,000 head um, that were rustled in this little heyday. So Pat Garrett got sent over there to kind of help slow that down, and did a pretty good job of kind of knocking down a bunch of the rustling, and eventually left on his own accord, because partially because of he was just not comfortable with working with some of these big ranchers, and particularly with some of the methods they wanted to use to put down this little rustler rebellion, if you will. And and remember, this is a guy that killed Billy the Kid, hunted him down, and and these ranchers were talking about doing shit that he was not comfortable with, and so he left, and but they had while he was there, they had kind of took up shop at the LS Ranch, which was a big ranch at the time, and they got to be known as the LS Rangers. So, well, then Pat Garrett leaves, and the rest of his crew that are still left, they're still there at the LS Ranch, and they're known to go into town, and as the article says here, they're known as barroom gladiators, and and they just had a reputation for looking for a fight, and just being an all around asshole. Just too big for their britches. They got a little bit of power, and they're not afraid to wield it. And if you remember back to the episode I did on Trail City, this was a lot like Trail City. Not too far. I mean, the 5-hour drive maybe. So Tascosa is kind of northwest of Amarillo. So kind of in the same general areas. I mean, like I said, it's about a 5-hour drive, but not too far from where Trail City and Tascosa. But they're both known. I mean, they're kind of the last outpost on the frontier there, before you have to go way out into no man's land, and not the best of people that lived there. And then even for this Tascosa town, there was another part of town called Hogtown, where even more filth and just awful people lived and frequented. And the sheriff there at one point said in like it was 26 killings in a 12-month period in this little bitty border town, or not border town, but frontier town, and way on the outskirts of nowhere, and they're just nothing but gamblers, thieves, ranchers, cowboys, and in this case, hired guns. And so anyway, back to the article here. It said cowboys of the local LS Ranch are considered by the Tascosa locals as just another batch of barroom gladiators, troublemakers that like to drink, brawl, and are quick to slap leather when not given their proper due, from a group of small ranchers and rustlers known as the Syndicate. I don't know how much. I saw this a couple different times, and where it says this these people called the Syndicate, and I couldn't ever find much on them. But what I could find was a whole bunch on Syndicate ranching, and so what I'm coming to make out is these guys were not so much the Syndicate, as they were the ones that were doing a little bit of the rustling and still branding Mavericks and trying to build up their own herds and compete against these big guys. Some of them probably with noble intentions. Some of them were probably just all in out cattle thieves. But anyway, the article calls them as the syndicate. So one of the most troublesome LS riders is a cowboy named Ed King, who after Pat Garrett leaves, this guy's kind of in charge. And when he begins courting a Dunn and Jenkins Saloon girl named Sally Emery that has recently broken up with syndicate member bartender Lamar Albert Lym Woodruff. The hell of a name. So anyway, Lym Woodruff. A fuse is lit and it will result in multiple deaths. Not leaving the situation alone, in the days preceding the weekend's regularly scheduled town dance, King and buddies from the LS Ranch make a point of taunting Woodruff, calling the man Pretty Lym, and forcing him to call Ed King Daddy, even slapping him in the face. So then there's a big dance and everybody comes to town. So 2 a.m, really not a great written. Goes into a lot of detail, and I like that, but it's the wording on this article is not great. 2 a.m, while tiring of the dance, Ed King, King's buddy John Gottlieb Lang, and 2 other LS cowboys, Frank Valley and Fred Chilton, grab their mounts and ride off to have a drink at the Equity Bar. Passing the Exchange Hotel on their way to Equity, just after shift at Dunn and Jenkins, Sally Emery calls out to King, who dismounts and with his girlfriend in tow, heads up the street to Sally's place as Valley and Chilton hand the reins of their mounts to Lang to tie up, along with King's horse, as the men enter the Equity. Seconds later, the street explodes with violence as King and Emery approach Dunn and Jenkins on the southeast corner of Tascosa's Plaza. Ed King, a voice calls out from the darkness of the saloon, and the cowboy turns to see who has hailed him. He is shot in the face by a syndicate gunman, crashing to the ground with the blood streaming out of his mouth. As Sally runs home at full speed, Woodruff comes out the saloon, puts a Winchester against King's neck, and pulls the trigger before retreating back to the bar. The murder of his friend, witnessed from just up the street, John Lang rushes into the Equity and calls out to Chilton and Valley, "Boys, they've killed Ed. Come on." Declaration heard, the 2 cowboys join Lang and sprint across the street to a cramped yard behind the Dunn and Jenkins Saloon. Inside, along with Woodruff, are syndicate leader Jesse Jenkins, gunman Squirrel Eye, Charlie Emery, Poker Tom Emery, John the Catfish Kid Go, and Lewis the Animal Boostman, were a number of team in the process of exiting the drinking establishment. So, I don't know why, unless these guys are just all gamblers, but I don't know why they all have nicknames, but pretty interesting. But the guy, the leader of this syndicate is a fella named Jesse Jenkins. He owns the bar, but he's also, I believe he's the guy that, he's the guy that Elmer Kelton, I forget the character's name, but I believe this is who that character is based off of that kind of led the Cowboys strike. So anyway, before we get into that, I'll finish this up. Where a number of men are in the process of exiting the drinking establishment. Guns blazing, Valley begins firing on the men with both of his revolvers, scoring 2 hits on Woodruff, 1 to the killer bartender's belly and 1 to the groin. That put Woodruff on the ground, where he kicks shut the back door to the saloon, and 1 that takes a chunk of flesh out of Charlie Emery's leg. Gunfire, however, makes him target number one for the saloon shooters, and after Valley puts several shots through the now closed door, he follows his round into the saloon and is greeted with a lethal rifle round to the head through his left eye. Almost the same moment, the next door owner of the North Star restaurant, Jesse Sheets, spending a late night at his business to keep an eye on an employee he believes is robbing him, pokes his head out of his establishment to see what all the nearby ruckus is about. Big mistake with so much lead flying about. Targeting movement. Chilton puts a fatal round in Sheets' face, and a second later, he is killed from a slug to the chest. Comes from someone shooting from behind a wood pile behind the saloon. Dying, he hands his pistol to Lang, who continues to fight as he retreats down the Spring Street with bullets striking all around him. As he makes for the Equity Bar, where he finds reinforcements in the form of Sheriff James East and his deputy Charlie Pierce. Reversing direction, the trio head back towards the Dunn and Jenkins Saloon, where they fire on a shadowy figure. They drop into the woodpile, and much groaning and choking. The Catfish Kid. Fight over as the men police the saloon carnage. Catfish Kid crawls quietly off into Tascosa's darkness, having successfully faked being hit during the gun battle. Alright, so pretty much after that, there's a big hubbub, as you can expect, and they've got like 50 cowboys from the LS ranch volunteer to ride into the town and burn it down, and you know they're out for blood, and luckily cooler heads prevail, and the sheriff gets everybody rounded up, and they put him on trial. He closes down all the bars and the whorehouses on the day of the trial, and I believe the first one was a hung jury, so they couldn't agree unanimously on him, and the one dude, Woodruff, the guy, the bartender that had his heart broke and did some shooting of his own. Well, they thought he was gonna die because he was wounded pretty bad, but he ended up living. But they take him to trial, hung jury on the first one, go to a retrial, and they all end up getting acquitted. And apparently, all the records from that trial, I don't know if there was a fire or something at the courthouse or something happened, and now all those records are gone. But boy, that would have been really, really interesting to see the evidence on that. But it was later said from the sheriff there, it was like John East, I think, something like that. He said basically the sentiment at the time was they didn't hold it against somebody kill a man if they were in active combat, and then it was more of a self-defense motive, and I see if I can find that. But basically, they didn't really feel like that it was like a fair fight. That was kind of their attitude. Like, well, it was a fair fight, and it is what it is. But the series of events that led up to it was pretty damn fascinating. Like I said, a lot of it has to do with corporate influence. Um, there's just it's it's the middle of the big cattle boom of like the late 1860s, 1870s. I guess this was 86 when this happened. So it was kind of the tail end, and and it was also kind of the tail end of those big like overseas syndicates too. I think some of them held on for a while, but 1886, 1887, there was a huge blizzard that wiped out just massive amounts of cattle. Um, and it caused a lot of those overseas outfits that had those big ranches to sell out. But it was also, the labor movement was kind of in, I won't say it was like the early stages, but it wasn't quite like full swing like it was at the turn of the 20th century. But there was a lot of um a lot of labor. I mean, I guess you could say it was kind of in full swing, because that's what brought it about, was when these bigger ranches started enforcing these ranch laws, which really kind of spurred from the XIT ranch, which the 10 counties in Texas, huge ranch. And they enforced these kind of, they called them ranch laws, but they weren't really laws at first. They eventually got the Maverick law in place, but it really cramped the Cowboys style. Like, I mean, it's just like, if anybody out there that is cowboyed in the feedlot, working at a big corporate yard, exactly how that feels. There's just so many different rules and regulations that they enforce on you. And back then, I don't know so much what the purpose was, as today it's more for insurance liability. But back then, that wasn't really a problem. I mean, you didn't have any of these labor laws that that was going to restrict you. I think it was more just to kind of keep control, and I think a lot of it just stemmed from people that didn't know anything about the people that these policies affected. Um, Being the ranch cowboy, which is not particularly good at following rules and instructions. They're pretty independent minded. And but then when when they enforce all these rules, and then they have basically the set pay across all these ranches in the area, it led to a strike, and it was not a very well organized strike. But kind of like a lot of stuff Cowboys do, it's not particularly organized. It's kind of just like, well, let's go full bore into it, see what happens. We'll try to make a plan, but we all know your plan can go to shit real quick. So you got to be able to adjust on the fly, which is good for when you get cows that turn back on you or something, or you get a little hiccup during the day that you have to adjust around. That's one thing. But when you're trying to organize a labor movement, yeah, it takes a little more organization than your typical ranch cowboy is capable of. And you're also talking a bunch of different guys that typically can't agree on anything ever, and you're trying to present your case as one unified voice. And it's it's kind of fascinating, and I'm always at a quandary. Growing up, I was in a very very conservative part of the world. I won't say my household was not so much traditionally conservative, I guess, on political views, but we were very conservative as far as social upbringing. But as far as political views, I don't know. We just the area I grew up in. You were kind of brought up to think that you know unions, labor movement was that's all it's all left wing, and it's and left wing's bad, and then of course there's always a caveat that's like, but in the early days the unions really served a purpose, and then like the more you delve into it and you realize what really the kind of the always the case is with labor unions is they are not only important but probably vital to a healthy economy when they do what they're intended to do, and that's to represent the workers and not a whole bunch of political interests. But um you look back on some of those on the labor movement as a whole, and I'm very much a private property, free market, you know, anti-government regulation, anti pretty much government anything. And that'll probably put me, if I'm not on a list already, that I'm very much anti the government being in control of most things. I think there's certain things the government should stick to, if anything at all. But so, and we've always, I, I guess going back to what we always kind of grew up thinking the unions were essentially bad, and I don't care for unions that much. I it's kind of like your politicians. If they take the one that you think is a good one, and if they would do what they say they're gonna do, I would probably I'd probably like them, but they never do. That's kind of like the unions. They're they're just more of a political machine than anything anymore. But once you work for a like a big corporation, you realize big corporation's no different than government. Like everybody, there's so many rungs in the ladder up the hierarchy, and you got to go to this person. You got to go to your boss, so they can go to their boss, so they can go to their boss, and then run it up the chain. And your regional manager or whatever has no idea what, like, say at Cactus you had the VP of feedlot operations. He had no idea what the feed manager at Syracuse feed yard's doing at any given point in time, and just unless they're there on a yard visit or something. But it's it's just a big machine, and that's exactly how these ranches were. When you're talking the XIT, that was like 3 million acres. I think. No. Hold up here. Um, anyways, it was a big damn ranch. I think it was something like 3 million acres, and you had a bunch of different cowboys working on it, and then you had your cow boss, and then you had like your range boss, and then you had your bosses above that, and then you had your accountants and your lawyers and everything, and then eventually you had your board of directors and your shareholders, but everything, like all the big power came from overseas, and the people running the money over there had no freaking clue what any of these policies they implemented would really meant to the to your working cowboy. And then when you start messing around with their pay, they go ahead and strike, and it really didn't go anywhere. You had a few people like this Jesse Jenkins guy who ran the saloon there, and and you had a few others. But it was just kind of your classic range war power move by these big corporate ranches, and there's a certain trap that people either on the libertarian wing of things or even on the conservative, the right wing side, where you tend to err on the side of a private company, but if it's the private business, they can do what they want, but at some point they get too big, and then I think that was the whole thing with the antitrust um, movement in the in the around the turn of the 1900 eight, 20th century, I guess. Eight The early 1900s, late 1800s, the trust busting stuff was, I think it was all in, it was all in good, with good intentions to break up these big companies, but I don't know. It just it's a weird how it happened back then, and now it's kind of happening again now. When you look at when JBS sold out of all their feeding operations, and so now it's just Five Rivers, and instead of JBS Five Rivers, um, that was I mean, that was a pretty big deal, and maybe that had bigger implications than we realized at the time. That of some of these big corporate conglomerates breaking apart, and that one I think was essentially, that was done voluntarily, probably just to get some heat off of them. They had a I mean they had several Brazilian politicians in prison for some sort of bribery from JBS. So I imagine there was plenty of that going on here in the U.S. as well. But I just wonder. I don't know on some of these bigger corporate ranches if there's been anything like that happen here lately. I haven't heard of anything, but it's just kind of funny how all this, it's like cycles through history. But uh, you should go read The Day the Cowboys Quit, and it's a really good story, and Elmer Kelton does a really good job of kind of bringing characters to life instead of just reading from a history textbook or from a newspaper article of describing the event or something. But how he kind of goes into backstory and character development. He does a good job of it. But it's interesting how it was just that there's always been that struggle from the working class to the, well, and I guess even before, like the working class struggle, it's always been the king versus the peasant. You move into the industrial age, and then it's the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, and now it's if you remember back to Occupy Wall Street, it was the 1% against the 99%, and now it's always something. But yeah, it's kind of funny how that movement even made it down to the working cowboy level, where the most hard-headed, non-compliant, um, can't tell nothing people alive. There was enough of them that banded together to try to go on strike against some of these big outfits, and I guess kind of had a go of it for a little bit, but to call it a success would be a pretty big stretch. But it made a big ripple at the time, kind of like this. Some of the stuff I was reading about this big fight at the Jenkins Saloon. It inspired the final gun scene in Winchester 73, which is a classic Western movie. And at the time when it went down, it was a bigger deal than the OK Corral shootout in Yuma, and actually had quite a few more people died on it. I mean, it was a deadlier gun battle for sure, and it just for whatever reason, Tascosa, Texas, didn't have the staying power of Tombstone, Arizona. Tascosa's got a pretty good ring to it, but Tombstone just sounds like an old west town. So, yeah, maybe that was what it was. But that was kind of the height of and kind of the apex of or I guess the not apex, the climax. Climax of I guess the cowboy labor movement. It's a weird story. Boy, it's amazing how you mess with a fellow's livelihood and people start shooting, it seems like. There's a lesson to take throughout history, that you start messing with people's livelihoods and how they make their living, and things get violent. So, anyhow, I thought that was just an interesting story. There's a whole lot more there I could go into. I'll have to at some point. But it was it's funny how that just the sheer shit show of reading that article of how that fight went, or that gunfight went down. I mean, that is just utter chaos. And and I guess where was that? Apparently there was another from the other side that of that fight, from the bartender side of the fight. The way they recalled it was that there was a bunch of shooting and they went outside to investigate, and they got fired upon. But I only saw that in one of the articles that I read, and every other article says that no, they called out to this Ed King guy, and two people shot him dead right there. So you're looking at just cold-blooded murder, and then the after, or the fallout of that, is all the other deaths are just fallout from this cold-blooded murder. And as a hung jury the first time, and then they got acquitted the second time, and the sheriff's saying that it was because they don't like to convict somebody for killing another man in combat. But if they killed this guy in the first guy in cold blood, the rest of it not really in combat. Unless there was just really bad blood against these guys, and it sounds like there was. So boy, it was crazy story. Crazy story how that all played out. And I think it all was kind of the culmination of this new way of ranching, where they just really cracked down on the on how you were allowed to do your job, and a lot of those cowboys made pretty decent money by taking the extra time to go gather mavericks and put their own brand on them and sell them. They were able to sometimes start their own herd that way, and eventually move out of cowboying and start their own little ranch. But that led to problems for the bigger ranches, because they would a lot of times they would settle at a water hole that big ranches normally had use of, and now they didn't, and that led. It's how all these range wars starts. Is little guy breaks off, big guy gets mad, there's a fight, and will it ever be resolved? Probably not. The constant cycle till the end of time. I'm a sucker for the underdog, so we'll keep fighting or something. I don't know, but interesting stories. So, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hey, we still got I think I got 3 spots left on the Spur raffle. So if you want a shot at it, shoot me a message. $50 a spot. 3 left. As soon as they're gone, we'll raffle them off. So, other than that, have a good week, and I'll be traveling later this week, so I'll try to get 3 episodes out. No promises, but I'll do my best. So anyway, move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Your eyes up in the morning, beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. We'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right.